Good afternoon. My name's Heather Deeth. I'm the head of ethical buying and now sustainability at LUSH Norteamerica. I live and work on Turtle Island on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. The pronouns I use are she, her. It is a privilege and my great pleasure to be with you all today and to share space in person again. You'll find that I'll be wrapping up a lot of some of the themes that we've been hearing today, because they're definitely the themes we're seeing. As we've noted, the timing of our gathering is important, just a few weeks after COP26. And we know that we must be increasing our level of ambition, that we must find those practical steps forward, and that we must find more alignment between nations, especially between rich nations and poor, and that businesses must act. Today, I'm here to share some of the experiences at LUSH as we've worked through our lens of climate justice, human rights, and how business and trade intersect, and how we work to source our materials and fight climate change. If the governments are slow to act, then businesses must move, and this will be the very roots of any foundation of any responsibility program in business. For those who do not know LUSH, LUSH is a beauty brand. We're based in the UK. We make bath bombs and soap and skincare and hair care and many other personal care products to delight. We believe that our products are good value. We are headquartered in the UK with 937 shops around the world. We have 6 shops here in Madrid and 1 spa. We're vertically integrated. So we own our own manufacturing, our retail shops, our digital e-commerce sites, and our digital fulfillment centers. And I'll spend some time later talking about our farms. We are a campaigning activist company, and we use our voice and platform to work with movements and grassroots organizations to create systemic change. And we do that in the most authentic way we know how, and that's through direct action. We were definitely those people protesting at COP. Even today, on Black Friday, which is usually our biggest sales day of the entire year in the United States, we have gone antisocial, meaning that we have turned off all our channels, social media channels related to Meta. So we've turned off Facebook, I have to get the list, Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp, and TikTok. And we are doing so until those platforms can provide a safe environment for their users. The foundation of that is that we would never harm our customers, and so why would we do that? By creating an environment that is unsafe. On the other side of our value chain, focusing on our raw material sourcing, we have built an ethical buying program with key pillars around non-animal testing and transparency. And it's through a transparent lens that we seek to examine and understand the risks that exist and how we best mitigate those through proactive management, and that we always look to source where we have the least environmental impact and social benefit. We believe that our challenge and aspiration is to use all of our purchasing power to have a positive impact in this world and to be always adding value as part of the chain. We've been doing this work for 25 plus years, and I can tell you we have learned a lot of lessons along the way. It's certainly been an imperfect path, and we are constantly learning, adapting, evolving, innovating. But ultimately, we have arrived in a space where we believe transformation is possible. And we are working towards finding our own regenerative pathway to a more just, equitable, and green future. Or in our LUSH language, to leave it lusher than we found it. So 3 key points I'd like to lead us to today is recognizing the human value chain, acknowledging the role of procurement and its role in relationships, and how innovation in the supply chain ultimately creates this regenerative transformation. To start, let's remember the human value chain, which we just started to talk about. During the past 2 years, we've become acutely localized by the pandemic. Our world has become our families, our neighborhoods, that 5-kilometer radius we were allowed to have a walk in, our municipalities, our nations. And that was really easy to do when the borders are closed. So we are less connected to our global community. And it's been, at the same time, the extremes around the world have continued, and the pandemic is certainly not over, depending on where you live. The entire continent of Africa is less than 10% vaccinated. So it's been easy to forget that the pandemic has exacerbated many social inequities, and it has had profound impact. The first is around the overall global economic outlook. We know that extreme poverty, we've gone backwards by many years, possibly decades. Extreme poverty is when people live on $1.90 US dollars per day. We've gone backwards. In North America in particular, we saw that there was unequitable hardship faced by people financially for BIPOC, hourly workers, and women. Food security, which we've talked about already a bit today. Last year, 300 million people were food insecure, and 70 million at immediate risk of starvation. Food security is driven by climate change, conflict, and there's been many, many challenges related to this, and it does impact through your supply chain. One of the issues that we've looked at most closely is the state of labor, which has seriously declined during the pandemic because the workforce has deformalized. So there are fewer hours, less money, less often, and one thing people may not realize that school shut down in most of the world, and the children went to work. And so you have countries like, it was worst in Latin America, but even in places like the Philippines, the children were out of school for 20 months. And so the state of labor is poor. There are a lot of children out there working. So LUSH has been closely following all these issues as they relate to the communities we work with and how the risks have shifted. Health and safety is now the leading issue we look at with our suppliers. And there's been a lot of rhetoric during this time around companies wanting to move their supply chains home, domesticated. But I think that needs to be looked at because there are freight challenges. We have to look at that, but also to consider that we are not islands and that our wider global impacts. Economic stability is a bridge and a vital lifeline. Our experience is that trade can build back after war and conflict, and money and trade can be stabilizers. So in all of this, we have tried to ensure that money continues to flow to our suppliers. Unfortunately, the LUSH business has stabilized. We are out of the acute, as a retailer, the acute pandemic state of the last few years has been very hard on us as well. And I'm thankful that we are out of that in most countries. So as we emerge, as we build back better, the ask is not to be in our own communities, but to think about our global humanity with our compassion. The plight of the worker is real as we grapple with injustice, struggle, and hardship. And we need to keep this in our minds as we look to shift and solve these global challenges. At LUSH, we choose to purchase from places that may seem difficult, and we do that as directly as possible, whether that be from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Lebanon, Palestine. It makes a difference in those places. But the point is that they aren't places, and yes, there are beautiful geographies around the world and special ecosystems, but they're also families, farmers, factory workers, business owners that support the economy. So we must always be asking ourselves, what is equitable? What is just? And how do we work in business with a human lens? Secondly, we need to reconsider the role of procurement in the supply chain. Over the years, the LUSH approach has been to see suppliers as partners, to look long-term, and to really understand the potential that is there and to evaluate where the value is so that we can ensure that the money is going to the right places. And it's through building relationships with trust that you can find that transparency. We know that a race to the bottom on price or short-term fixes often presents more barriers to transparency and drives mistrust between parties. And of course, you always need buying policies and code of conducts. That's all very foundational. But the work to build an ethical supply chain and sources is actually much wider and broader. Buying is a relationships game and requires systems thinking focus. With a new focus on carbon reductions in mainstream business, most companies have their eyes on Scope 3 emissions. It's often the largest footprint. That was confirmed in the last panel. It's certainly true for us at LUSH. So we're seeing our supply chain in new light and the choice of supplier and what their own commitments are. Procurement is going to help facilitate our carbon reduction. And so we acknowledge that to hit a science-based target commitment of 1.5 degrees will require that business transformation, but it's most important in our supply chain. And from our experience, you have to get ahead of the climate impact, especially on materials that you wouldn't even think about, because you can't actually handle that level of disruption in your supply chain. We have experienced that this year. So when you think about your materials, we had that massive storm in Texas earlier on this year, and it took out all the plastics manufacturing and oil production along the Gulf Coast in America. At LUSH in North America, we have purchased 100% post-consumer recycled plastics for over 12 years. And we didn't think we'd be impacted if the virgin plastic operators go down, but even we were hit with massive scarcity and skyrocketing prices. And how we use that to our advantage on our side was to build our case for circularity. At LUSH, we run a bring your packaging back, and we give you something when you bring a certain number. In North America, our Bring Back Your Black Pot program would get you, our return rate was about 17%. But what if we could actually target something like 75%? And would that decrease our reliance on virgin plastics manufacturers in that whole market? Could we just shift it all together? We need to keep pitching more resilient supply options. And it's worth having a look at where your vulnerabilities are now, proactively. Which of your suppliers are committed to the journey of science-based targets and net zero? A new set of criteria have arrived, and this will also fuel innovation. Easing into our work at LUSH in regeneration, we know that there is a convergence of issues, and everything is interconnected. This is the moonshots question. How do we shift how business impacts social and racial inequities, climate action, biodiversity, soil health, waste reduction, responsible consumption, food and water sovereignty? Back in 2014, LUSH was really focused on growing our business. And on the supply chain side, we were looking at how we could double our raw material usage and improve our ethical position. We decided to create what we call the Sustainable LUSH Fund, where we take 2% of our raw material spend and put that money aside to do what would traditionally be called producer capacity building and explorations in scaling up permaculture and other agroecology projects. We wanted to demonstrate that you could plant trees, rebuild forests and ecosystems, do that really critical economic development that's needed around the world, and also find a way for our materials to get into our products. I can tell you over a glass of wine, all the projects that we did that were good, and many got a community off the ground, and that included doing organic heirloom cacao in the last coastal rainforest in Ecuador, upscaling honey projects that went directly against conventional honey production, which is extremely destructive, especially in pollination contracts and monoculture crops. We worked to crack regenerative almonds in California for at least 3 years. None of those projects actually led us to materials in our supply chain in a meaningful way, but we really learned a lot in doing that work. We learned a lot about how to find partners and how to work with them. We learned how to build a network, and we got really clear on what a regenerative pathway on ingredients would look like. I would say our most successful project was supporting our partner Forestwise in Borneo. We purchased an ingredient called Alipe butter, which is pressed from the seeds of the tenguan trees, which is a keystone and endangered species and critical part of the ecosystem for orangutans. When we visited a few years ago, we found that the villagers were cutting down the trees, not even for the value of the timber, but just to grow rice. The sale of the seeds put value into keeping those trees standing and could provide economic means beyond subsistence farming. We spent $1.6 million on partner projects before we really started to focus on our own farms. Ultimately, we didn't want to be prescriptive, and it didn't achieve the long-term goals and vision we were aspired for. This work actually needs more investment, way more scale, and way more value add at origin. We started to build farms and farmer networks in places that were in serious need of economic support and where environmental degradation was high. In the simplest form, our motto was to put more trees in the ground and more money in the hands of farmers. We have 4 farms and extensive partner farmer networks at all of them in northern Uganda, Guatemala, Peru, and Arizona in the United States. Over 2,500 hectares of land is being protected, and this will be critical and the foundation of our insetting program on our pathway to becoming climate positive. Regarding purchasing land, I acknowledge that this can cause some discomfort. All the land we purchased was severely degraded and for sale. And all of them have been established as separate business entities. And we felt like that we had to model what was possible for farmers, who are often the most undervalued part of the chain. There's a diligence that is required in local markets, so do not underestimate the amount of work that it is to stay in compliance and in good standing in local markets. You have to build a local team on the ground, and you must also be very, very aware of the indigenous peoples and their territories, stewardship, and relationship. Our farm in Guatemala is one of my favorite places. We purchased 225 hectares of cattle pasture in Izabal, close to the Caribbean coast. That region is severely deforested due to cattle and palm plantation. Unemployment is very high. The road in which the migrants walk from South and Central America is also very close to our farm. In collaboration with local partners, we work to design a very basic agroforestry system. Cacao, bananas, avocados, coconuts, vanilla, hardwoods. Several of these ingredients we buy and put into our LUSH products. We grow these materials in the highest standard of regenerative organic farming techniques, meaning like there's no pesticides or herbicides or anything like that. Which actually means on a practical side, it's much harder, because when it's cattle pasture, you have endless amounts of grass growing, so you'll spend all your time weeding. And this is even after many years. And as your trees will grow, the grass will have less sun and it'll go away. It's very simple. We have planted over 148,000 trees on the farm in Guatemala. We've enrolled 600 partner farmers to grow our model agroforestry systems, and I have done a guarantee with every farmer that we will purchase everything back from them at a guaranteed price. that is, if they follow our organic growing methods. On the community side, we have 50 full-time staff, and when we need seasonal labor, there is a lineup because we want to be providing jobs that both pay well and support the local economy. Our farm in Uganda is actually where one of the largest displaced persons camp was, just outside Gulu in northern Uganda. We are 100 kilometers south of the border with South Sudan. And not only is the population still recovering from the prolonged war and conflict, but climate change is acute. Most people grew up living in camps. And when the UN dropped food, they wouldn't drop any firewood to go with that. And so they chopped down every tree they could find. Again, just for very basic survival. And still the most pervasive deforestation we see is for charcoal production. So we work with farmers to grow sesame seeds as cover crops and then slowly work through bananas, hardwoods, cacao, vanilla, moringa. And we've built a solar-powered factory and continue to expand. For us, the real economic development happened when we shipped our first container of moringa oil and sesame seed that had a value of $250,000 US. And that's what real economic development looks like when you give that money out to farmers for their seeds. Recently, we've partnered with a group called Partnerships for Forests, and we'll continue to expand our farmer network in northern Uganda up to 1,000 farmers from our current 200. So things have gone slower than we would have liked on our farms during the pandemic. It's been hard. We haven't been able to go there, so we are deeply indebted to our local teams on the ground. And so I would say, if I could give you any of our key learnings about this program overall, is that you have to have a very long-term business and financial plan. When we presented this concept at LUSH, we looked at a 20-year business plan. And 20 years is hard to look at a return on investment and get executive buy-in. But that's actually what's required if we're actually going to have a regenerative transformation. It will take time. Secondly, I actually really believe that our work in sustainability and ethics requires funding mechanisms. It's really hard in the sustainability world to be going hat in hand all the time, asking for money to do this project or this project or this project. You start to lose the wider context of what you are working towards. And so for us at LUSH and this work, having this 2% funding mechanism means that I don't have to go scrambling for money every year, that I can also plan long-term based on what my purchase forecasts are. And lastly is around executive support. I spoke earlier on a panel about how embedded sustainability and that ethical lens is at LUSH. And at the core of it, your executives have to stick with it. Like, we've definitely been through some very hard moments in these projects, and we have always been supported at the top, even though you don't always know what you're doing, and you won't be sure what's right, and that you need to be able to talk it through in somewhere that's safe, where you're not worried about the repercussions, and that you will stay in the work, and we have done that. So how is any of this work transformative? Our hope that it will be climate stabilizing, carbon sequestering, and that it's protection for forests and ecosystems and habitat. My hope is for equity for all, that there is economic development and a wealth redistribution, and food and water security, and talking about those food systems. Let's create that. But ultimately, what we're trying to find is a new model for business and true partnership. And what could that actually look like to be in partnership between rich nations and poor, the South and the North, and that we can find a new path. Transformative changes are possible with that bold and ambitious vision across the value chain. True sustainability can be embedded in your organization and amplified in the supply chain. At LUSH, we feel responsible as a brand with a voice to take a stand and engage and activate our customers towards a regenerative pathway and address the climate emergency from our climate justice lens. We find that they are asking for this. And as companies and brands, we can start to tell the story in an authentic and rich way. And ultimately, this will inspire our customers to act as well. So thank you for letting me share some of our work at LUSH as we work towards making the world lusher than we found it. And thank you all for the inspiring, the pollination of ideas and activation of today. Thank you.